This is the 90s, where the race for the best gaming tech was pretty much everywhere. And while Sony and Nintendo were the big players, other companies were desperate to get a piece of the pie. Take Sega for example. They were trying to win people over with their newest console, the Sega Saturn, set to launch in late '94 for $399. But the hype didn't last long. That same day, Sony made their move and shut them down with just one line.
$299.
Despite still having some good games, Sega ended up losing popularity. It left them no choice but to build a successor that could actually take on the PS1, going for the last resort, the Dreamcast.
SEGA is rolling out a new video game console this week.
It's sort of a leap in video game technology, and Sega is going to use this to make a comeback into the marketplace.
僕はやっぱりその 3D 技術とか、サウンドとかもそうなんですけど、やっぱりそのモデムを使ったネットがすごく興味があります。
Going all in the next generation, Sega needed a game that could prove what the Dreamcast was truly capable of. A game with weather cycles, NPCs with their own daily routines, quick time events, advanced graphics, 3D fighting, mechanics that, back then, weren't explored enough. But despite all that innovation, the game didn't take the company where they wanted to go. In fact, it was the beginning of the end for Sega's time in console wars. A game that nearly cost $48 million and was incapable of reaching success in the next decade. Sonic, Streets of Rage, and Panzer Dragoon were huge Sega hits, but one fighting game was stealing all of the attention: Virtua Fighter. It was the first 3D fighting game created by Yu Suzuki, the same guy behind Space Harrier, Outrun, and Hang On, all classic arcade titles. And due to the game's popularity, two sequels were released, Virtua Fighter 2 in '94 and Virtua Fighter 3 in '96, which gave Sega an idea. What if they made a fully 3D open-world game built around those mechanics? The Elder Scrolls 2 was already exploring the idea of a much more alive and interactive world. So based on this idea, Sega began developing a new game with the working title of The Legend of Akira, based on one of the protagonists of Virtua Fighter, which later became Ryo Hazuki, and with the official name of the game being Shenmue. During the initial phase of development, Suzuki wanted the game to be more of a cinematic experience, like if the game was really alive and which the players really felt the control during the gameplay. QuickTime events, which didn't even have a name yet, actually started with Dragon's Lair in 1983 and were refined in Super Donkey Shot in 1984. Suzuki took that idea and baked it in under the cutscenes to keep players immersed. The innovation didn't stop there. The team built a city with over 200 independent NPCs, each with their own schedule, where they lived, worked, and slept. Let's take Sawano-san as an example. She gets up at 9 and goes to work at her shop, Hoku Hoku Lunches, by 10 AM. She spends all day working until 8 PM and walks casually through the Buita all the way to her home.
一人一人の生活のパターンがちゃんと作られてるってことですよね。やりたいわけですよ。
Suzuki called this free, full reactive eyes entertainment, a bunch of mechanics meant to create a world that reacted to the player, giving them total freedom. Apart from the NPCs, that meant that every environment was interactive, and to make it feel real, every object was fully modeled. You can open drawers, play slot machines, flip light switches, play pool, open the fridge, throw darts, or spend money on a gashapon. Most of these objects had zero impact on the story, and most players wouldn't even notice them. Even the in-game map had to be interacted with, so if you had to find a place, you needed to pay attention and figure out where to go. But the craziest detail was the weather system. The game used something called magic weather. On your first playthrough, it generates varied weather so you get a good mix on sun and rain. But after that, you could turn on the actual 1986 weather. This mode used real data from the Yokohama Meteorological Observatory, so the weather in-game on any specific day was exactly what happened in real life between 1986 and 1987. So, if we were to compare it, on December 3rd, for example, we would have light rain, followed by a heavy rain on December 4th, until finally on December 6th we get a clearer day.
おそらくシェンムーみたいな現実路線に近いものが一番いいですよね。
And rather than creating a completely fiction town, the developers looked to a real location, Dobuita Street, giving Shenmue a real sense of authenticity that really made you feel like a part of that
So
world.
it's a military surplus store, just like in the game. They're real. It makes you feel really authentic. I mean, there it is. It's in real life. It's totally true.
And to make sure that all that tech really popped, they focused on things on how eyes reflected light or how clothes moved. And since the game was born from Virtua Fighter, the team used motion capture to make the fights look very authentic. The battle system had dodges, punches, kicks, and grapples. It was a full-on fighter experience inside an RPG. And before the launch, the hype was through the roof. Magazines were calling Shenmue the next big thing, talking about the massive world and the level of interaction. Sega's future was basically in Suzuki's hands. During its showcase on Tokyo Game Show, Sega released a demo, giving fans an early look at the game.
グラフィックが綺麗ですごい簡単で実際に自分が覚えてるみたいですちょっとゲームとは言えないもうなんか一つの映画みたいな感じですけど
And by late 1999, Shenmue was finally ready. But despite the tech, the mechanics, the weather, and the detail, the game had one big problem: its pace. The focus on realism meant players often had to literally wait for time to pass in-game. Some NPCs only showed up at night, shops only opened during the day. You were often just wandering around with no direction. One magazine pointed out that there wasn't much to do in the world once you explored the city and the arcade, making you basically just staring at your watch. Dreamcast magazine said that as good as it was, at the end of the day, it was just an imitation of real life, and that they'd never been so bored by a game in all their years. And while some saw a masterpiece of immersion, others saw a mess of mechanics that didn't quite click. And even though it sold 1.2 million copies, it wasn't enough to cover the massive production cost. Since Shenmue 2 was being developed alongside the first one, the sequel still happened. But Sega didn't account for a certain PS2 game that was kinda blowing up, a game where you can also explore a city, but in a much more chaotic, fast-paced way. After that, Sega decided to pull the plug on Dreamcast, marking their exit from the console market. Shenmue became an unfinished story, leaving fans waiting for decades, until the 2015 Kickstarter for Shenmue 3.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Yu Suzuki.
I hope we can make Shenmue 3 for all the fans. Thank you so much. Thank you.
But even with its 2019 release, it wasn't enough to bring the saga back to its former glory, at least for now. Despite its flaws, Shenmue's DNA is in some of the biggest games we play today. Toshihiro Nagoshi went on to produce Yakuza, refining the living city idea into something much more sustainable. Yutaka Ito eventually became a director for Lost Judgment. And while Sega left the console world, they found their footing elsewhere and stayed relevant. Looking back, Shenmue feels less like a failed experiment and more like a glimpse into the future. And more than 25 years later, people are still talking about it. And for a game that was once considered a failure, I would say that's pretty impressive.